Well, I'm going to go ahead and get it started before it gets too late. And I'll just keep an eye out on the participant list to see as people join or enter the waiting room. Um, yeah, I'll first start off with an introduction of myself. My name is Morgan Doran. I'm a livestock and natural resources advisor with the University of California Cooperative Extension. I cover a four-county area all around in the Sacramento region. Um, and I'm joined with Allison Van Aneman, who is a UC Cooperative Extension specialist in the Animal Science Department at UC Davis. And Allison, you want to say a bit about what it is you do there?
Sure. Thanks, Morgan. Good evening or afternoon, good morning to everybody. So, I work as an extension specialist in genetics and genomics, and have been following the development of not only estimated breeding values using conventional approaches to do EBVs, but also how genomics is now being used to help inform the accuracy of genomically enhanced EBVs. And that technology has really come online in the last decade or so, and adds a lot of accuracy to the merit estimates that we can get for sheep and cattle. And so my interest is in seeing people use these estimators of genetic merit, because they really are the best guess we have as to the traits that a sire is likely to pass on to his offspring. And so it's pretty widely used, as you'll see, quite disparate in terms of what happens in California and what's happening in Australia. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to use them more in America, because they've been shown to work time and time again. And so I really hope that's what people might take home from this series. Thank you.
And as the slide suggests, this is a collaborative effort between the University of California Cooperative Extension and the California Wool Growers Association. This is a second seminar. We did a similar one in March of 2004. And in a bit, I will, when I have a chance, I'll put a link into the chat for that webinar that we did. And that webinar covered the basics of, or the basic mechanics of EBVs, how they, what they are, how they're developed. We had two presenters, one from Australia and another from Midwest United States, who described, like I said, just the basics of EBVs. So we're going to take it at the next level. In this webinar, we are wanting to get perspectives from some sheep producers on how they are using and applying EBVs in their operations. So what we will do is we will first have I'll cover some of our two speakers. I'll cover who they are, their biographies. We'll have a poll just to get some basic information from you all. And then I'll basically hand the reins over to Allison, who will work us through the speakers. And also, and each speaker will be about a half hour, approximately a half hour. We have a good amount of time with buffer built in, but approximately each speaker about a half hour. We'll have time for questions afterwards. And then after each speaker, and then we'll have some time for discussion, more broad discussion on EBVs, how people are using them in their operations, or any other concerns, questions they may have. So I will first, I'll do an introduction of both speakers. Our first speaker today is going to be Bindi Murray, who is, I had the pleasure of actually visiting with Bindi in her farm last month, and I was quite impressed. It's a very large operation, and it's just really incredible how efficient Bindi runs her operation with only two people. So it's quite amazing in that aspect. But Bindi, she has a 7,500 U self-replacing merino and terminal first cross flock. and it's located near Woodanilling in Western Australia. So it's Western Australia. It's the southwestern part of Western Australia and of Australia in general. Um, Bindi has used Australian sheep breeding values, which are their EBVs, for more than 15 years to increase productivity, fertility, and eating quality traits in both her commercial and nucleus flocks. Bindi currently serves also as the chair of Sheep Producers Australia, which is their Australia's national sheep producers association, equivalent of our American sheep industry. She's worked in advocacy and research before returning to her family farm, and Bindi is passionate about demystifying genetics. So I think we can all appreciate that. But demystifying genetics for producers and demonstrating the practical and profitable gains that objective measurements can deliver. So Bindi, thank you very much for taking the time. And it's early in the morning where you are, and currently in Sydney, though, not Western Australia. And let me quickly go through Jeff's biography, and then I'm going to hand it over to Allison to continue the program. So Jeff, I've known Jeff for a lot of years. When Jeff was working in Solano County on a beef and cattle, I'm sorry, a beef cattle and sheep operation here in Solano County. He decided to pick up shop and move to South Dakota, and there he's currently the operator of Black Hills Land Stewards, a registered NSIP, Targhee seedstock and grass-fed beef and lamb operation. And it's located in western South Dakota, a little bit northwest of Rapid City, correct? Um, so Jeff's background, managing large-scale Western sheep and cattle operations, provided him with a realization that were not enough options for commercial sheep producers looking to utilize sires with EBVs and other economically relevant data behind them. And this created the drive to start his own Western flock utilizing EBVs and a rigorous collection of traits such as fertility, foot and udder quality, dollars produced per pound maintained, and stayability, just to name a few. And Jeff understands the barriers and benefits of utilizing genetic improvement tools like EBVs across large flocks, and offers maternal sires for the Western sheep producer backed by data and environmental adaptability. So thank you both, Bindi and Jeff, for joining us and spending time sharing your experiences with us today. So since genetics is really way outside of my wheelhouse, Allison is going to kind of moderate. This is definitely in Allison's wheelhouse. It's going to moderate the majority of the webinar for us. So Allison, I'll hand the reins over to you. And oh, I do have a poll. I can't forget the polls. And so I'll just throw this up, and you guys can. Hopefully this works. I'm a bit of a poll neophyte. Um, and I'll launch this, and I'll just give you guys some time and close it. We don't have to view the results right away, but it's just basically to collect some information from you guys on what you are doing and current understanding. Just a couple of questions right now. I'll leave it up for a couple minutes, and then I'll pull it down. And let me stop sharing here so that Bindi can share
Okay.
your screen.
So if you've answered those three questions and put submit, that'll go away from your screen. So that's one encouragement to fill out the poll. So it is my pleasure to host this session, and I'm looking forward to hearing what Bindi has to say. And so I'll invite you at this time, Bindi, if you want to try sharing your screen, and we'll make sure that's all functioning, and I'll give you the thumbs up, and then away you go. But I'm very jealous of Morgan, who got to go visit your property. I was hoping to do the same, so I have to next time I'm in WA. But I'm glad you're in Sydney, because the time zone's a little more compatible with late afternoon in California than it would have been if you were in Perth. So
Absolutely.
you have,
ducked across the country to get a better time zone
Well,
for the web.
that is what I call above and beyond the call of duty. So thank you very much. So I see you're on full screen, perfect, and I
Great.
will pass it over to you, Bindi. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm just going to say hello because I'm not going to try and cover all of the time zones with good morning and good evening. But thank you very, very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm going to just run through a bit about our farm because I know that Australian systems are quite different. So I'll just run through a little bit of information about our system. And then I'll also go through genetics and genomics in our system, but also a bit about the broader Australian use and resources around genetics and genomics. So because I'm a visual person, I'm taking Morgan's representation of where I am, and I've just put it up so that you can get a bit of an idea. You'll see Sydney, and you've got the East Coast, which is where everyone visits, and then way over on the other side on the west, there's that tiny little pin in the bottom corner, and that's where we are. So in Western Australia, and then within that, there's just a satellite image of our main farm. And the reason that I'm showing you this is because you'll see there's all those funny circles dotted around. We have quite a different system, and Morgan probably, hopefully, can vouch for this, where instead of having large rivers, we have a lot of these water, like wet saline areas and natural lakes. And that variation in our farm soils and so on is part of the reason why we need a mixed enterprise. We need sheep and cropping to really drive efficiency in our farm, and that soil type drives sort of what we do. So this is sort of from one of the higher points on the farm, looking down towards, you can see a couple of those lakes in the background. Our current total area is 13,500 acres, and of that, we have 9,500 acres, which is productive. So that means we can use it for either sheep or cropping. And each year we have about 5 to 5,500 acres that we'll use for winter grazing of sheep. And I know I'm not sure whether DSE, dry sheep equivalent, is a terminology that's used, but it's basically a metabolic equivalent to a whether a castrated male in the sheep, and we normally run about 18,000 DSE over winter. So we've had a bit of a change recently. We've gone through a family succession and split the farm up. So our area that we're farming now is slightly smaller than it was 6 months ago. And so one of the things that's thrown into focus for us is, with less land available, we need to drive the productivity of our sheep enterprise even harder than we were before. So I'll just talk a little bit now about our sheep enterprise. So we only have winter crops. We're a rain-fed system, and that's common throughout most of Western Australia. There's a lot of irrigated agriculture on the east coast of Australia, but on the west coast, it's mainly rain-fed. And we only get one crop a year, so winter cropping is it. We get one chance, and it's determined by the rainfall. So that's why livestock play a really important part in terms of balancing risk as well. And with our pastures, we have sown pastures, and they can be cereals that we're sowing just as for a one season run, or we'll sow subterranean clover and cereals for a longer term pasture. We have some permanent pastures, and they vary from Tagasasti, which is a fodder shrub, saltbush, which are sort of a naturally occurring grazing, and tall wheatgrass. And then our normal sort of volunteer pastures will be based predominantly on subclover and have ryegrass as well. So our season is highly Mediterranean. We have cold, wet winters and hot, dry summers. And our growing season rain, it'd be nice if I could order it every April to October, but it can be pretty variable and late breaks for us. If it doesn't come in April, it becomes quite challenging. And our average rainfall is 13 inches, but our range can be quite incredible. So at 6 inches, it's not very good because we can't grow enough. And the other problem also is when we get up around 17 inches of rainfall, it can be pretty challenging as well because waterlogging becomes an issue in terms of limiting our pasture production. So just a bit about our sheep operation. So the timing is that we lamb in winter and then we shear in summer. And you'll see here there's a little feed cart just in the corner of the picture there. We supplementary feed depending on the season and how much grass we're growing from 6 to 12 months of the year. And that supplementary feeding, we mainly use lupins, which are a legume, and barley is our cereal of choice. So we grow those on farm. The other part that's really important is using our crop stubble residues. So over summer, once we've harvested, we can move the sheep back across all of those areas. And we use confinement feeding and feedlotting to get our animals up to specification and try and get all of our sheep, including our merinos, into feed. And it also lets us get the timing right in terms of getting our crops in on time, getting our weed control right, and resting our pastures when they're trying to establish at the start of the season. So as Morgan mentioned, we're merino based, which is a wool breed, and we've got a self-replacing merino flock, and then we're mating somewhere between 1/3 to 1/4 of our merinos are mated back to white Suffolks as a terminal, and we also have a merino nucleus flock. So it's a small flock of about 250 to 300 ewes, and we use that basically as a ram multiplication battery. So we buy in really superior rams and then use them to sort of multiply them on farm, and then we can actually check how they run in our system as well. So this is just a bit of a timeline of how genetics has become a stronger part of our system and the changes that we've made. So back in 2000 was sort of when I first was coming back into the family farm, and back then there was lots of EBV information available on terminal rams, not so much on merinos. And we'd go out and select rams with my dad, and he'd pick the ones that he liked the look of, and then when he couldn't decide which ones he liked the look of better, he would look at the EBVs and use that to make the final decision. And eventually I managed to get him to flip it around. And so we selected the ones that had the best, the EBVs that we were looking for, and then used their conformation and appearance as a final check. And through those conversations, which you can imagine were quite fun, one of the things that I identified was we didn't really have a defined written breeding objective. We were pretty clear between Dad and I, and we had pretty common views, but we hadn't actually gone through the process of really detailing where we wanted to go and what we wanted to do. So that was the next step. And in 2007, things had moved along a fair bit. And so it was possible to buy both merino and terminal rams that had ASBVs. And there was also that change in language from EBVs to ASBVs, and that's the Australian Sheep Breeding Values, which form part of a database and have linkages so that we can compare sheep across the whole database. So a really big increase in terms of the power of those breeding values. So in 2010, we closed our nucleus flock. We'd previously been elevating high-performing animals out of our commercial flock, but we closed that to manage inbreeding. And then in 2015, we had the opportunity to be part of a pilot for flock genomics, and that was where genomics was sort of first pushing out into the commercial space. And so we in that pilot, we did a profile of our nucleus flock. So it didn't tell us the genomic potential of the individual animals, but it gave a snapshot of across the average of that flock. This is where they were sitting. So it was a really early trial, but it's a really valuable tool. And I like it because it gets that information into the hands of commercial producers as well. So in 2019, we did some merino feedlotting because we've been really trying to push the meat traits in our merino woolen sheep and get them really dual purpose. And that was about looking at that work that we'd done in trying to push those meat-based ASBVs. How did they perform in someone else's environment, someone else's management, and how did that compare? 2020, we started using EIDs in our nucleus flock. 2021, we moved that across into our breeding ewe lambs, and that's also about data collection. And we now use EIDs across all of our sheep. And in 2023, not part of a pilot, but I just went back in terms of a benchmarking exercise and did some more individual genomic testing to be able to just benchmark where our nucleus flock was. And so I'll talk quite a bit about, those two data points in time as I go on. So my genetics professors at uni and my supervisor when I was working at the Department of Agriculture would tell me that this is not a defined breeding objective. But in terms of getting that shared view of where we want to go, this is where we landed for everyone being able to see what we're trying to achieve. So you'll see it's got ASBB and then a code in the brackets there. So they're the standard codes that we use across all Australian sheep breeding values. So I should be able to look at the yearling weight ASBB of an animal and compare it across any other animal in the database. And that's a really powerful part of using the ASBBs. And then on the far side, I've got the direction. So where are we wanting to go with this trait? And like our indexes and our ASBVs, the first ones that came on board were the production ones. So one's about wool and meat production. And then we've added in more over time that are more about resilience traits and meat traits and so on. So we've added to this as we've come along. And as a general perspective, what we've been trying to do is maintain our wool traits in our merinos, but really push those meat, not just meat total production, but meat quality traits, and also the easy care ones. So in our area, fly strike is a real challenge. And so I've been really keen on understanding what genetic traits predispose sheep to fly strike and how we can really push along that so that we can have a permanent decrease in their susceptibility to fly strike. And by doing that over 10 years, we're actually able to stop mulesing on our farm because we were able to move the genetics far enough that we didn't need to continue that husbandry practice.
Bindi,
Hey,
you might
Bindi.
just explain what mulesing is.
Right.
Oh, okay, cool. So mulesing is when the lambs are really young, a tiny bit of skin is removed around the tail. And then when it heals, it actually heals a lot tighter and a lot smoother and removes the wool from that area. So it does actually have a massive decrease in dag formation. Is dag a term that you guys use? No. Okay, cool. All right. So dag is just like the accumulation of hard feces at the back end of the sheep. And once they start forming, it just continues, and it's not good for husbandry, but it just attracts the sheep blowfly that we have here. And the sheep blowfly that we have is not great in that it doesn't need a wound to get in. It has teeth in one of its larval stages, and it can actually eat into the animal while it's alive. So a really, really bad welfare outcome. Managing fly strike is really important, and mulesing is really effective. But the problem is it's visually it's really confronting. And there's pushback through the supply chain about moving away from mulesing as a practice. So that was one of the things that was a real challenge for me. How can we use genetics to fix this sort of wicked problem around meeting consumer expectations and meeting the welfare needs of our sheep? So there's a couple of other traits in there that relate specifically to that mulesing fly strike challenge, and that's the yearling worm egg count. So that's really important to try and have sheep that are resilient to worms, which is a challenge in our area. And also that early breech wrinkle and early breech cover, because if we can use genetics to plane the back end of the animal and have less wool and tighter skin, then we don't need to have a surgical intervention. And then the other trait that's probably important in there that I'll just touch on is staple strength, because it's sort of a resilience trait. So that's one that we've used early on before we've had other ones that have come in. And you'll see I've got a couple of indexes in there. Through this presentation, I'll talk a fair bit about the use of indexes, not just in our system, but in Australia. And for our merinos, we use the Merino Lamb Index, but it was previously called Merino Plus. We have updated these indexes, and that's a combination of traits that most fits what we're trying to achieve. And in our terminals, we have the Eating Quality Index, which was previously called the Total Carcass Productivity. And those two indexes really let me drive consistently along sort of genetic progress, because otherwise if I keep just selecting individual traits, it's very easy because I want everything all at once. And a lot of these traits have linkages. It's very easy to just select yourself round in a circle and not actually move forward. And then those conformational traits that I talked about earlier in terms of making sure that the sheep that you are breeding from are sheep that you actually want to see walking around and are fit for purpose on your farm. So things like dag and wrinkle, which I've touched on, but feet, face cover, wool traits, and hock cover. We have a lot of grass seed production, and so it's important if we can get a clean face and clean hocks, it's much better welfare outcome from the animals and much better wool production as well. Okay, so this is just a bit about those indexes I was talking about. So within Australia, we have these genetics databases which are managed through Sheep Genetics Australia, and Sheep Genetics Australia is a subset of Meat and Livestock Australia, which is our industry research and development corporation, which is actually whose foyer I'm sitting in at the moment. So I talked a bit about Merino Select. That one was updated in 2024, which is that change of name that I talked about. And that's when we had tools available, more genetic tools around eating quality and resilience traits. So it was updated to become a bit more balanced around eating quality and resilience, and reduce the focus slightly on wool production and meat production, just meat volume rather than meat quality. And Lamb Plan, which has been in Lamb Plan, which is the one for terminals, the database for terminals, that hasn't changed quite as much. And that had updates in 2019, again, to focus on including those eating quality traits. So you can see on the left-hand side of the screen here, they're the traits that make up the index and their contribution to it. So we've got sort of the standard ones that, drive those payment levers. That's what we get paid on quite clearly is the amount of meat that we're producing, lean meat yield. But there's a couple of ones down the bottom there. So intramuscular fat and shear force, which are real drivers of eating quality experience and making sure that we're producing a quality lamb that consumers want to buy. So you can see they've got quite a heavy weighting in there. We had a few years where we didn't have those in there, and we're concerned as an industry that our eating quality experience might slip. And then lambing ease. So lambing ease is really important. As Morgan mentioned, we're a low labor input business, and it's really important for us that our ewes are capable and are able to lamb unassisted out in the paddocks. We don't barn lamb. So lambing ease is a really important trait that has been included in the index. And then if I move across to the one on the other side, you can see that selection within the merinos is a lot more complicated because we're looking at wool and meat and resilience traits. There's a lot of more traits in there, but you can see, I guess, the traditional ones that you think about are up the top in terms of a wool index, but we've got eating quality, and then conception, litter size, rearing ability, wrinkle, all of those other traits that I talked about. So these two are industry standard ones, but they best match what we're trying to achieve on our farm, and that's why we use those. All right. So in terms of that merino one, I spoke earlier in the timeline about the two data points that we use to sort of measure our progress on the farm. And so I've stolen these graphs from Sheep Genetics Australia and then overlaid my data on it. So the two blue points that you can see there are those 2 points in time where we've checked in with our genomics to see where we're traveling. So this is the Merino Plus index that I talked about. And you can see we're tracking pretty well on this one. I'm pretty happy with this. We're still sitting sort of above the overall where the breed sits across all Australian all animals in the merino database. So this one, I think we're doing pretty well. I like this one. If we move on to post-weaning weight, and we don't have these across all traits because in that initial pilot there were only a few traits that we were able to do because it was such an early stage. But you can see here with our post-weaning weight, we've had quite an increase, which is which is good. And we're also sort of keeping the same stretch above the mob. But if we look at this green line, which is really an indication of where the genetic merit of the entire Australian merino sheep flock is going, you can see that I'm not the only one who's thinking that we should really improve some of the meat characteristics of merino sheep. So you can see as an industry where we're going as well. Same with yearling weight, which you would assume would follow. If post-weaning weight has done what it's done on the previous side, you would assume that this would do what it's done as well. So again, happy with that. And here's where it gets a little bit more challenging. So you can see with the blue dots there, I talked earlier that our aim was to hold our fleece weight. We've sort of held or a little bit of a decrease, but the challenge is that if you look at what the rest of the industry has done, we've actually lost. We've lost against the industry. So our maintaining when everyone else is improving is actually us going backwards, if that makes sense. So I've got a bit of work to do here and just improve, make sure I've got my focus, and I've actually used these two data points to work out when I say maintain, what do I mean? Do I mean maintain the same value, or do I mean maintain the same gap against the rest of the industry? Same here with fiber diameter, and I think you can see we've sort of held, but again, the rest of the industry has moved, but we need to be a bit clear about what we mean and keep a really good eye on fiber diameter. And I'll just, if you have a little bit of a look down here on the green line, which is the whole of the Australian sheep flock in effect, you can see that there's been quite a fundamental shift in the type of sheep when we look at our wool production. So our superfine wool industry, which is, they're sort of down around the 13, 15 micron, have had a really tough time, and a lot of them have moved away from a superfine animal towards a coarser wool, a more dual purpose. And so you can see that real uptick and that real change in terms of the Australian, the average fibre diameter of the flock. So why do I think genetics are important? I guess I'm really passionate about genetics being part of the suite of tools that commercial producers have, as well as studs, because we have some really important traits that are hard to measure and hard to progress on farm. So I've talked a bit about those production traits and resilience traits. One of my early roles was as a genetics research officer, trying to sort of break down that genetic predisposition to fly strike and understand it, so that producers could use breeding and not just use chemicals as tools to handle some of these tricky issues. And while I was in that role, I also got to help with our information nucleus flock project, the INF. And that was really important because it was within our research farms. We had a really broad range of animals that were run in a controlled environment and sampled, and allow us to develop those, to really build and strengthen that database, so that our national databases had enough diversity, had enough information to give industry back strong information, and to look at some of those novel, hard to measure traits and include them in. So I've also been involved with Sheep Genetics Australia in developing and testing some of its products, especially ones that are more focused at commercial producers. A lot of our seed stock producers will engage directly with the database. So how do we then, and they're more familiar with it, but our commercial growers, how do we sort of break that database down so it's really easy and they can access the information to inform, better decision making? And so here I've just I'll pivot here from more talking about the farm and myself and my choices directly. And this is more just a bit of a snapshot as to where we've gone, as an Australian, Australian industry. So of the indexes, the three lots of information I've got on the board here, we've got that merino index up the top, and then that terminal index is the next one down. And then I don't have maternals, but that we do have in Australia a maternal carcass production index as well. I spoke a little bit earlier about Sheep Genetics Australia. So it was started in 2005 with 2.5 million records. And so that information nucleus flock was about really building that startup point and getting the database strong from the start. So Sheep Genetics Australia is funded by levies on Australian sheep producers and a division of Meat and Livestock Australia. So Alison touched on earlier around genomics and enhanced ASVVs and enhanced EBVs. And for me, that's really exciting because it lets a lot of these tools come down into the hands of commercial producers, and that benchmarking and that decision making can be really sharpened. And so you'll see as these tools have come in, we've had consistent growth. If you look at that sustainable merino growth over time, we've just been chipping away, but as we get towards the end, this runs through to 2023, you can see there's starting to be a real stretch, and we're starting to really get some great results here. And so that means that on average across all of them, and there'll be different breeding objectives within the database as well. But within the database for the Sustainable Merino Index, we had an average increase in index of 4.5% in 2023. So lamb eating quality, which is the other one, you can see again, just consistent progress, but we're starting to get that real stretch away, I think, as more people get involved and more people understand the tools. So in that index in 22 to 23, we had a 2.9% increase in index score across the board. The maternals, you can see though, they're really stretching away. They're doing a great job. And the maternals is quite a new and probably a dynamic industry as well. So there's a lot of people getting in and pushing hard. And I think that's reflected in that 4.9% index across the board there. And this reporting is really, for me, I don't know, maybe I'm a bit of a data nerd, but I find this really interesting. So, as a collective, where are we all going? How much are we improving as a whole industry? So just this is my last slide. I'll just to sort of a bit more about that bigger picture of what Sheep Genetics Australia, where those indexes are going for us. So you can see across the top there that we started with 2.5 million records across all of the indexes, all of the databases. And now you can see that the number of animals inside the database is really, really, really growing. And on the next row down, there's KidPlan. So we've started a genetics database for the goat industry as well. One of the things that there's many of them who are better at genetics than I am in here, but data quality is really important. So you'll see there's a few metrics in there about reduction in pedigree inconsistencies and better data that's coming through genomics and the strengthening that genomics is doing to our database. And the confidence of producers. So we're actually being able to get more producers that can self-manage, that understand their own data, understand the database, and can put information into it successfully. So I think this, like Sheep Genetics Australia as a resource, is really important to allow these genetic tools to be developed and in a way that can be used across the industry. We have, I talked about mulesing as an example, but, methane efficiency and so on. We have some really, and also those meat quality traits, we have some really challenging, some messaging and some work to do that's really challenging to select on farm for those traits in a conventional way. So we need to harness the power of genomics to be able to deliver improvements. And I think that's going to be, where the real game changer for us. But I have a little cautionary tale down the bottom that, for us in that progress from 2010 through to now, by using these enhanced tools, it really, it lets us really leap forward. So we've sort of gone from getting around on a bicycle or a horse and moved up more towards the Ferrari space down the end there. But the thing with driving around in a Ferrari is you need to really know where you're going because you're going to get there fast. So I'd really, the really important part is knowing where you want to get to and having a really good map, because if you jump in the genomics Ferrari, you will get there fast. Thank you very much.
Well, great. Thanks, Bindi. That was a really fascinating overview, and it's nice to reflect on the progress that's been made in particularly the last well, 15 years, basically, you were saying your dad was just using phenotypic selection, and maybe EPDs is a bit of a crutch, or EBVs, excuse me. And then there's a tremendous amount of work in the background there from the geneticists at AgBoo and the likes to collect the data to enable the multi-breed evaluations. And I think it's you don't need to know how that's all done, but it is an incredible amount of work that has been done by that group, and I really take my hats off to them, because they've developed a really useful tool for producers. And I guess what's nice to see is how much is now just being self entered into the database. So it's the Ferrari's running on its own now. It can take the training wheels off to some extent, and that definitely wasn't the case at the beginning. And so I think it's maybe a nice tale for how something like this could happen with EBVs in America. And so I will open it up to any specific questions that anybody in the audience has that they want to ask Bindi. You can type it in the chat or raise your hand if you're game, and unmute yourself and go ahead and ask the question. So do we have any specific questions from the audience for Bindi? So I guess, Bindi, I'll ask you something. If you didn't have EBVs, how would you select your rams?
Probably we would still be back looking at physical measurements. And in terms of that work that we've done around eating quality, intramuscular fat, we just wouldn't be able to do it. We did, early on when we were trying to push down that path in terms of selecting sheep that were resistant to fly strike, the only tool that we had was challenge-based selection, and that's also incredibly inefficient. It's not a good welfare outcome. So, looking at would we have been able to change our whole flock to a non-mule system? Probably not. There would be so many tools that wouldn't be available to us if we were still just using, visual selection with a few physical measurements.
Okay,
well, in the absence of any questions,
I've got a question for Bindi. Yeah. So looking at the fleece weight, it looks like you're maintaining or maybe just going down a little bit. So that's something you want to work on in order to try to keep up with the industry. Are you willing to sacrifice some of the carcass traits, some of the carcass quality traits in order to get there? Is that your objective?
Yeah, I think it's just a bit of a refocus, and so when we're looking, I'll still use those indexes, because those indexes manage some of the correlated traits and the antagonism between the traits, but I'll look at putting in some some single cutoffs for those traits that I'm wanting to make sure that we're pushing ahead. So animals that perform well on the index, but maybe necessarily on that trait, other traits in the index are making up for it, I'll try and take them out of the ones that I'm selecting. Because it's, I'm still happy with where we are in terms of like the amount of production that we're getting at the moment. But genetic trends, once you start on a trend, you keep going that way. So for me, it's important to just try and pull that up now. And I think it's also, Morgan, when I first started looking at ASVVs and using them, I didn't have a really good benchmark of where we were. So I knew what direction I wanted to head in, but I didn't know where I was standing. So I couldn't actually tell if I was making choices from further back from where I was, or whether I was choosing in front. And I think I did a little bit of backwards choosing. So early on, some of those ones that I brought in, they were heading in the right direction, but the starting point was behind where I already was.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. Okay.
We do actually have a couple of questions. I'll go ahead and read one to you, Bindi.
Oh, thank you, Alison.
Yeah. Can you speak a little bit about how the index value translates into an actual value? So, for example, with fiber diameter, how do you read an EBV value and understand how that will compare to a non-indexed flock?
Yeah. Okay. It's just I'm going to try and at least pull it up so that I can speak to it. I'm skilled enough to be able to share it again. We'll see.
It's much the same approach.
So the indexes are built with an economic contribution in mind. Like that's a really important part of using. That's why even though, as I just said to Morgan, I know there's specific traits within the indexes that I need to manage. Using those indexes is still really important because they're used on, balanced genetic production and economic information. And if I'm going to see if I can get.
So just for the audience's information, the indexes are developed at AGBU, which is the Animal Genetics Breeding Unit of University of New England. And basically it's an economically derived approach where they'll alter one unit of value in EBVs for different traits and have a look at how that affects the dollar profit resulting from those animals is kind of the derivation of it. And that's how those indexes are actually developed. So it weights, for example, the value of increased wool versus increased meat versus how much more they eat, and kind of does all of that modeling in the background to come up with the index value. Sorry, Bindi. Go ahead. Oh, you're sharing a email. There we go. Now you're on the slide. Not hearing you speak. I don't. Yep, now I hear you. Oh, now I don't. I don't actually show the microphone showing up on your screen, which usually means you've unplugged your microphone in some way.
Okay. How about now? Is that
good?
Better?
Got it. Yep.
Okay. So this just shows the response. So if you use this index, this will be the likely response over time. So your fleece weight should increase by 4.3%. Your fiber diameter should have a decrease, and then through all those traits, I won't go through everything, but moving across, then the next column shows you that contribution to economic gain. It's really hard. You can't do this as a point in time because all of these commodities, like the economic contribution to farm gate profit, changes with markets and so on. However, it's just, in average pricing over the last period of time, those changes in productivity will deliver that much economic gain. But the work, as Alison said, the work that goes in behind the scenes by the amazing assistant.
Oh. Okay, your audio is cutting out a little bit again.
Stop sharing. That might improve things a bit.
Okay. All right. So the next question was, Bindi, could you speak a little bit more about genomics and a few examples?
Sure. So genomics, 2015.
Okay, you're breaking up. I think you're out of power on your speakers, is my guess. Are you on a some sort of Bluetooth? No. So we're not getting any audio from you at the moment. What I might do is I'm going to stop you here, let you try and figure it out, and then I'm going to have Jeff present, and then we'll do more questions at the end. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, it's fine. Is that anything else?
It's breaking in and out, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
No. Go for it.
Yeah, if you've got a corded microphone, like head jacks from your iPhone or something, that sometimes solves that problem. So sorry to do that, but it's a bit hard to hear, and I'm just cautious of time. So Jeff, I will pass it over to you, and I'll look forward to hearing your perspective in the United States. So all over to you.
So much.
Share your screen.
Can you hear me okay, Alison?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Perfect. Let me go ahead and get this screen up here. I'm not as good with technology as I should be. So let's see. And hold on a second here. I think we can. Are you seeing
that works? Yeah, you've got a little bit of a blank spot bit at the top, but it's not covering anything, so you're good to go.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you all for having me. I appreciate UC Extension and wool growers all that you do. Being a native Californian, former wool growers member, it's just great to be here. And there's a lot going on in our industry right now, but I'm quite excited about the future that's ahead of us. And so excited to present today. I think there's a lot of opportunity when there's low-hanging fruit like EBVs in front of us. So um, we'll get started. I'll just share a little about myself. Justin, I saw you were on the call. You probably recognize this photo. It's out at the McCormick Ranch in Rio Vista. So I kind of cut my teeth with sheep starting back in around 2014 or so when I went to manage the breeding herd division for Amy Livestock based out of Rio Vista in Dixon, California. And prior to that, I'd been operating some larger scale purebred Angus and Hereford operations and some commercial cattle operations along with cattle feed yards. And then upon moving to Amy's was exposed to sheep. Wasn't a big fan at the beginning, to be honest. The cattle seemed to be a lot easier overall, but they sort of grew on me. And back in 2020, our family decided to move out to South Dakota, and I kind of transitioned from the ranching side of things to kind of the ag tech space, and I was helping producers utilize equipment that measures feed efficiency in both cattle and sheep. And that's kind of when I decided to start what we're calling Black Hills Land Stewards, which is our little registered NSIP Targhee sheep flock and grass-fed beef and lamb program. So we kind of spearhead things with the registered flock, but anything that I don't want to sell or just doesn't really meet our criteria just falls easily into our grass-fed lamb business. And so we're operating right now in western South Dakota, as Morgan had mentioned, just kind of north of Rapid City there. So I want to start out by talking about some what I feel are key profit drivers in the sheep business. One of which is obviously fertility, fecundity. I think that lambing percentage, weaning percentage does arguably almost more, to your bottom line than anything else, kind of on this list. But it does need to be managed, and unfortunately for us, it's thought to be pretty lowly heritable. I mean, there's an argument to be made there against that, but I do think you can create females that create fertile females, increase fecundity and things of that nature through genetic selection. I think there is some movement we can have there. I've seen it happen, but as a trait, and using EBVs and other tools to kind of select for that, it's a little bit lower in heritability, heavily influenced by environment. So obviously performance, our output matters quite a bit, whether our aim is to increase growth, carcass traits, milk, but again, environment and feed resources do play a significant role. But as I always like to say, I kind of want that performance there for when God blesses us with rain and we have the groceries in front of these lambs to let them grow. Input costs, there's the flip side of that. We really need to cover, input costs and just make sure those don't get out of hand. I mean, there's low cost, medium cost, and high cost producers. Sometimes it's better to be on the lower, well, it's always better to have as low inputs as you can, but you also don't want to skimp on things that you might need, like mineral and other things. So it's kind of a line we need to walk, and that's why part of our program is trying to develop these sheep that don't need these inputs, right? We're trying to reduce those input costs. So I have a small or a quick poll question that I wanted to run past you guys, and you don't need to answer this. It's more of just kind of a lead into the next slide, but in my opinion, looking at fertility and performance, fertility and input costs, performance and input costs, it's easy to say, well, I could probably increase fertility and performance, but those are a little antagonistic at times. So would I be better off going after fertility and reducing my input costs, or are we looking at, maybe increasing performance and input at reducing input costs? So if you could choose to improve two out of those three as they're grouped together by 10%, which group would you choose is really my question to everybody. But my message is we can do all three at the same time. I have an extensive kind of cattle background that I've brought into the sheep deal, and I think it's really served me as I've tried to make better sheep. And I'll be honest with you, I love cattle, absolutely love them. But sheep are harder to make really good. There's more to look at, right? So, one of the questions we have is like, how do we make this happen? How do we do all three? How do we make these sheep what we need? And that is kind of hard when we look at we're managing antagonistic traits like wool quality and weaning weight. There's different even within wool quality. We're looking at wool color, right? Which honestly, in the U.S., I feel we really need to work on the whitening of our wool, and that's not something that we have an EPD for or we're talking about right now. But I think it's something we really need to look at beyond yield and fiber diameter. But again, back to a sheep, it's a lot harder to I forgot this picture to make a sheep good, and in order to do that, we need data. We need data behind our sires. We need data behind our ewes, and that's not easily applied in a lot of larger scale commercial operations, particularly maybe those that are running on mountain ground, maybe Forest Service leases. It gets quite hard, and so you know what we need to consider before we even start down the road, in my opinion, is, where are our genetics currently at? If you have nothing to base this off of, you haven't been taking any weights, you haven't been following your ewes for fertility or foot quality or anything like that yet, you're really starting from zero, but you got to start somewhere, right? And we need to start looking at what genetics we currently have. We need to look at what market segment are we going to market our lamb crop in? Are we selling right at weaning? Are we weaning at 60 days? Are we weaning at 120 days? Are we feeding these lambs all the way to slaughter and selling on the grid? Are we, raising them through the feeder lamb phase? All of these things play into the type of genetics that we need to bring in and the traits that we need to be looking at. Do we raise our own replacement ewe lambs? That's kind of the market I hit with my program. Is I'm more focused on raising an efficient female and utilizing EBVs to help me do that. I figure we run quite a few more females than we do on the sire side. Now, the sire has a greater impact. You can argue that easily, but I have to maintain more of these ewes, and I want sires that produce good ewes. And the way that I kind of follow that is by identifying my top ewes and keeping sires out of those ewes and stacking those genetics on top of each other. Do you have an easy to use, herd management data system in place? And again, depending upon how big you are, this could be a Google spreadsheet all the way up to Cool Collect, that Australian software to Shearwell. There's lots of options, but again, if it's not easy, it sometimes can be hard to keep up on. And I'm not saying that every commercial operation needs to do this, right? I don't think they do, but I think they could all benefit from this data, from this information. So how do we do this, right? Here's where the commercial guy can get some advantage from using these EPVs and from applying higher end seed stock to their operation, right? You need to align yourself with a producer that's willing and able to provide you with the data. If you're buying rams, from a producer that's not measuring any of these economically relevant traits themselves, you have no idea where you're going. And to me, coming from the cattle business into the sheep side of things, this has been the biggest shocker, because putting a pencil to paper, I cannot even imagine the amount of money that most of the sheep industry today is leaving on the table by not utilizing this type of data in their selection criteria. And I'm not saying this is everything, because I do think environmental adaptability, buying sheep that can perform in your environment, is more important than any of this that we're going to talk about today, by far. But there are sheep that can perform in your environment and still have the data behind them to keep moving you forward. Those are the sheep you need to be buying. Purchase rams that are proven to be above breed average. If you're starting from zero, that's where I'm going from this. Now, if you're already up running the Ferrari, then you need to think about maybe raising some of your own rams, or you need to find that person that's even taken it a step further, right? Selecting the correct replacement females. This is where I think the commercial guy gets into trouble, is not selecting the correct replacement females. She may look beautiful in the corral, but you didn't realize that her mom for 3 generations, you've been grafting lambs back onto her because she kicks, one of your twins off out in the field, and you've had to drag her mom in for the last 3 years. And that mothering ability, while it's not, you know, technically genetically correlated as far as attitude and things like that. Well, and I shouldn't say that because temperament really is, especially we've seen that in the cattle industry. But I do think mothering ability, a lot of that is taught. And if they don't have a good mom or she runs off as soon as she drops that lamb, I think it really can extend into those replacement females. So following your females to me has a tremendous amount of value. And the bottom line is we need to create a genetic baseline and track our progress. So really quickly, I was going to talk to kind of how we stack up compared to our friends down south. And according to MLA, it says that about 57% of Australian commercial producers are using EBVs. Okay, a lot of producers up our way, we complain about the imports and the competitiveness due to the dollar, the difference in the dollar, but they've been using this technology also for a significant amount of time. And I'm not trying to downplay those things, but what I am saying is they have that advantage and they're using this. So we better start adopting some things to kind of help us catch up and really push the needle for American producers to catch up. From what I've seen, we're sitting at below 10%. And I'd say it's probably 5. If I'm talking about, folks I know that are really utilizing EBVs on their operation the way that they should be. So that being said, though, to me, this looks like an opportunity. Okay, we've got so much low-hanging fruit here in the U.S. to just start using this information to better our flock. I truly believe the sky's the limit, and we have the ability, even with the dollar difference, to be competing with those folks down south. So I pulled this number from some work that Allison, actually, I think Morgan was a part of it. Anyway, the UC system did a few years ago, and feel free to jump in and correct me if I'm misquoting this information, guys. But what I had seen in that paper was an $80 per head advantage in end product produced from a simple sire selection. So I'm talking a low end sire versus a high production sire, maybe a higher loin eye. This was probably correlated highly to yield. Oh, forgive me for that. This is probably correlated higher to yield, I would imagine, but it's also going to correlate to increased growth rate. Okay. And when we look at the dollars associated with this, let's think about it for a minute as a commercial producer. All right. So we've got a 340 head load or so of fats we're sending to Superior Farms. Okay. I did a little math on this. Let's say they're weighing 145 pounds. And that's really irrelevant to this $80. But if we've got $80 per head in additional end product, if we're selling on the grid, we're selling that yield. Maybe not all of that's coming back to us as the producer, but a significant amount of that will be if we've sold these lambs correctly. On that one load of lambs, that's an additional $27,000 based upon the rams that we are using. Okay. So, and like I said, if we're selecting for that increased carcass yield, using this technology to kind of add that capacity to these animals, it's highly correlated with growth, and we can be using these to select for increased weaning weight as well. Not only are we making an additional 27,000 a load potentially, but we're also looking at decreasing the amount of time any of our finance dollars are sitting there accruing interest, without that $30,000 paying that back. And with interest rates this past year being at 9%, they've dropped now some around 6 to 7 for production loans that we're seeing in the US. But that's a significant amount of money and interest we can be saving. And when you look at what it costs you to get that, let's say we had a 1.2, all right, 120% lamb drop from these ewes, and we're running a white face flock. Typically, we're turning bucks out at 1 to about 35 head. That's about 8 rams. Okay. We want to go and buy some good rams, and we want these EPVs, and we've got to travel a little bit to get them. And I know this because in California, I really couldn't find the bucks I wanted with the EBVs behind them. But let's say you head out to Montana or you head out to South Dakota to see me, and you spend a little bit more money. You spend $1,500 a head, let's say, on these bucks, right? And you're buying 8 of them. It's about 12 grand. So when we think about that, the advantage of these rams is potentially 30,000. Let's say we only got half of that back to us, right? That's still 15,000. We've paid for the rams and made $3,000 the first year just by utilizing higher quality seed stock. To me, it is a no-brainer, and it just kind of drives home the point that, we don't always see the money that we're leaving on the table when we go to ship lambs, and everything can look good. The bucks look good. The ewes look good. We're making money. Sometimes we're not making money, but this is also a hedge against bad years. If we can increase our revenue, and again, that first year with these bucks getting completely paid off, and we're still increasing revenue, and that's only off the advantage. That's not even including, using them as a ram in place of a lower quality that we'd already need to be purchasing. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to run through a little bit of those economics because cattle guys have known this for years. We've seen it time and time again. And I think it's time we implement some of this in the sheep industry. So getting started, though, we got to simplify the process. I think the way we do that is by, using some of the available tools and technology to kind of track where we're at. This could range from even just putting regular ear tags into EIDs to the software system. Now, it could also just be buying bucks from people that use this technology. And that's honestly, if I was a commercial guy right now, that's what I'd be doing. I would align with a seed stock producer, look at those ewes. And if I wanted my ewes to be where theirs were, I'd be buying all their bucks. I mean, that's what we've done on the cattle side for a long time. We've produced some pretty awesome females, and it works quite well on the sheep side of things too. But I also want to be cognizant of the fact that there's a major barrier in finding those seed stock producers. And honestly, that's why we got into the business, was to help bridge that gap and fill that role. We're still expanding our flock. We're quite small now, but we're growing every year. And I do think that the barrier we're seeing there is due to the fact that people still want to spend $700 on a ram. And by the time a seed stock producer runs that through their system, collects all the data, puts it in NSIP, maybe maintains a registration, it's a significant cost, and it's a significant amount of labor that goes into that. And if you're going to sell a yearling for $700, it's really, really hard to recover that cost and argue that it's even worth doing, quite frankly. So we really do need to look at spending a little bit more money on these animals, but knowing that will come in return. So we also need to figure out, where do we want to go, right? We talked about our market end goals, but where do you want to go genetically? What's important to you? Is it feet, udders, structure? How are we going to get there, right? And also identify areas of opportunity based upon your targeted market segment. Most importantly, breed for an efficient ewe flock. I can't stress this enough. Whether it's cows or sheep, they're our factory. We need to produce good ones, and they will year after year make us some money. So I'm going to roll through this rather quickly, but I did want to touch on, what breeds right now have data available. So Katahdins honestly dominate both genomic enhanced EBVs as well as the amount of animals enrolled in NSIP, creating more accuracy in their EBVs. Okay. Other breeds, available, Polypay, Suffolk, Targhee, and there's lots of others, but those are kind of the next main groups. There's many other breeds, Rambouillet, I know, Dorsets. There's pretty much any breed you want should have some of them in there, except for some of the niche breeds. But their EBVs may not be as accurate as Katahdins, Polypay, Suffolk, or Targhee due to the use of those EBVs in that breed. So real quick, and I'll run through. I just wanted you folks to see, all right, so we got these EBVs, but what data is actually being put into the system? So for Rambouillet, Targhees, kind of range, whiteface range breeds, these are the data points that are collected and kind of when they are collected. I'm not going to, for the sake of time, I'm not going to run through all of that. But as you can see, you're running them through quite a few times in the first 120 days, and then you're collecting a lot of this data at a year as well. For hair breeds, Katahdin Dorpers and White Dorpers, they have close to the same, minus the wool traits, obviously, and then the additional fecal egg count. I do know in the Targhee breed, we're starting to get some fecal egg count stuff in there. I think that's super important. But one thing I've noted as I've watched the Katahdins is that it is negatively correlated to fecundity to a degree. We don't know why, but we are seeing that a little bit throughout some of the folks, registered flocks I know that are really pushing to lower fecal egg counts. Some, they're calling it a maternal breed, but I call it more of a maternal confinement breed, the polypays, really close to kind of the white face without really the wool. Data points being collected and terminal sires close to the same. And I should say on the polypays too, they've done a pretty good job of the fecal egg count as well. So we're going to run through quickly EBVs available because I wanted you all to kind of get to digest this, to really maybe write down a few that might be economically relevant for your operation that you can go then look at, down the road, or find some seed stock producers that'll provide you with the right information you need. So, but birth weight, very important. I will touch on this briefly because in the cattle business, we've gone way too far the other way. We've gone just so far down the low birth kind of road that I honestly think we're leaving a lot of opportunity on the table. And I personally lean towards higher birth weight bulls for cows. I do the exact same thing on these ewes. I really like larger lambs with a lot of vigor. Do I like pulling lambs? No. So you need to balance that and make sure that you're breeding, maybe your yearlings or your ewe lambs to something with a little bit more manageable birth weight than you are obviously those bigger ewes. So we have the maternal birth weight, which is an estimate of, genetic effects from the ewe to the birth of her lambs. This is actually directed at kind of in utero genetic component. Weaning weight, maternal weaning weight, which is the effect, the ewe has on the weaning weight of those lambs. Post weaning weight, a little farther down the line, more of kind of a grass-based number that I'd look at for running feeder lambs. Yearling weight. I do look at both of these quite a bit just because as I'm selecting for increased weaning weight, a lot of my customers, they're selling lambs at weaning. So I need a heavy weaning lamb, but at the same time, I don't want that ewe weight to get too high because that does usually correlate with more feed intake. And if we're running under fence, we want to increase our production under fence, but we don't necessarily do that by just increasing the weight of these lambs as they ship out the door. Because if these ewes are having to eat more to cover the increase in body weight, we could be shooting ourselves in the foot there. Now, on the flip side of that, if I'm running on all service leases, I'm going to be running as big a sheep as I possibly can because it doesn't matter. It's all under animal units. It's all calculated that way. We can graze as big a sheep as we want and produce as big a lambs as we want. So some of the wool traits collected are fleece weight, greasy fleece weight, or EBVs, I'm sorry, that are provided: greasy fleece weight estimation, fiber diameter, staple length, fiber diameter, coefficient of variation, curvature. And I'll back up real quick just because I do think we need to start looking at color in the US. We haven't really started that. I do that on our place, but it's not something that we really are looking at an EBV for right now. Some of the carcass traits, fat depth. Now, we're obviously, if we decrease that fat depth a bit, we're going to possibly increase yield. However, I'm very careful on fat depth because I like a ewe with some fat on her that can contain or can keep that fat on, breed back. She's got that to pull from as she, she's running through her cycle for the year. So it's kind of a trait that is more terminally oriented, I'd say, than maternal. Loin eye, muscle depth. I do look at this and try to work to increase that, but it's one of the last traits on my list personally as we're developing the maternal base, because I know that we can put this in with one breeding to a large loin-eyed Suffolk, and I think it's their job to really pack that in. Not that we can't improve that, but it's not at the highest level on my list. So some of these reproductive traits are, number of lambs born. Obviously very important. We don't want to get this too out of hand, though. We want our ewes to be able to milk enough, obviously, to be able to handle the lambs that they're dropping. Number of lambs weaned. This one is super important to me. If she has a lamb, I want her to bring it back in. I want that lamb alive at weaning. This is really more important than the number born. What are you bringing in, right? Scrotal circumference is a big deal on our bucks, but we also think it correlates to kind of some higher fertility females. And then the parasite resistance EBV. This is this is one that's really up and coming. Katahdins have been using it forever. I think it's really important. We need to start looking at this across most breeds. It's especially important for the South and those southern producers. So this is just some lamb data that I thought I'd throw up here so you can see kind of what you get back as a member of NSIP, kind of providing some of this data. And just I wanted you to see, just kind of everything on one page. So this is really what you would get back, or what your seed stock producer would get back from NSIP as you kind of start turning in some data. You've got, everything from birth weight, weaning weight, to, your post-weaning weight, yearling fat, loin eye, your greasy fleece weight, fiber diameter, staple length, number of lambs born, and then your range index. So I'm a big fan of that range index. I really do believe that these indexes really help simplify the combination of traits to help us move forward, multiple traits at a time, strategically in an economically relevant way. And so I do see a lot of value there. So I see so much value there that I've developed kind of my own, not highly based on EPDs, but I do throw some of that in there on our place. But it's more based on kind of some internal production records. So we try to take a balanced approach with it though, and then kind of relate this what I'm calling the $U index back to our EBVs. So included in the index, and I'm not going to get into how it's weighted and things like that, but there's pounds of lamb weaned versus years of age. I really want to know which one of these ewes is making us money, right? I like longevity in ewes, but I also want productivity in these ewes, and this helps me kind of weed those out. Number of ewe lambs born versus number of ewe lambs kept as replacements. So is that ewe producing good enough female replacements that I'm keeping them back? If so, I'm going to retain her. If not, and something comes up, she might get kicked down the road. But this also is applied to that index. And udder score, udders are really important to me. I've had sheep with teats as big as a Holstein, and these lambs can't get up and nursing on their own. And what does that cause me? A lot of labor. I'm not about labor. I'm about spending time with my family. And if a sheep is not making a living on their own, I really don't want it around. So udders really important to me. I want them to have a nice, well-attached udder with small teats, that's easily accessible to these lambs. And feet. So, and Justin could speak to this. He's on the call today, but operating in California, I got exposed to foot rot in our sheep. We bought and sold a lot of sheep, and it was almost impossible to keep it away with the way that we kind of operated, with doing some of those spot buys and things. But there are sheep, and we found them, that have good feet and good production, behind them, great udders, good wool, that don't get foot rot. And I can't tell you why, but genetically, we've selected for it. So we've just taken those good-footed ewes and kept, keeping them. And then we started looking at twins. And so started keeping those ewe lambs, and we had the technology to kind of help us sort those out. But my point with kind of raising this is feet are really important, and they have been largely ignored in the sheep industry. It's a big deal in the cattle industry. In fact, a lot of guys, they're not going to trim a foot on a beef cow. They're going to ship her. They're not even going to deal with it. I hate trimming feet. I absolutely hate it. Now, obviously, feed type and the type of sheep and production levels, all that combines to that foot score, but it is so important to me. And I have seen, if you can pick from a large enough base of ewes, there are sheep that do it all, and we need to take those, and we need to start producing more of them, right? And also the wool value. So wool prices are in the tank, but I do some direct marketing to hand spinners on Etsy. I still have quite a bit of value in my wool, and I see, well, just last year at COP29 at the United Nations meeting, one of their initiatives is to get away from petroleum-based fiber, or not, I shouldn't say fibers, but fabrics, and move to more natural-based options. I think wool will come back. I truly do. And I believe that it's one of the best options we have for a number of things, from your mattress to our clothes. I think that the value will be back in wool. And if we can have sheep that are doing it all and can maintain some high quality wool, that's what we're trying to breed for. So, and then dollars produced from progeny sales. So if a ewe is consistently producing a significant amount of income, I want to make sure I'm keeping replacements out of her, and I want to give her a fair shake at maintaining a spot till next year. So, what kind of gains can we see from these EBVs? Decreased fiber diameter while increasing weaning weights. Those two are kind of antagonistically linked, but we can accomplish that by the use of this technology. Increase lambing percentage, increase weaning weight without increasing mature weight of the replacement ewes. Utilizing birth weight to ensure lamb vigor. And that's really kind of it in a nutshell. And I'm sorry, trying to hurry through this just because my laptop might be losing power. But I'd be happy to open it back up for questions. But I wanted to just, again, thank wool growers and the UC Cooperative Extension for allowing me the time to share. So.
Great. Well, thank you, Jeff. I think we should thank you for sharing your time with us, and also going through your operation there and how you're using EBVs. There was a question that I will address to you first, but it will come to Bindi as well, and we'll see if Bindi's still able to speak to us. But one of the questions was that a common excuse for not using EBVs is it just takes a tremendous amount of time to do it, and I don't have time to do that. So how would you respond to that?
So I would say that from a seed stock perspective, when we're looking at the return on the time and investment, like I had mentioned earlier, that could actually apply, quite honestly. I mean, it really can. Like, the time and effort into doing this, when you're selling rams for $600 to $700 at a year, I mean, you're honestly breaking even if you're lucky at that point at what we're currently getting for rams. So I can see that there. But again, what are we doing if we're not making these sheep better? And there's so much opportunity for even seed stock producers to increase demand for their animals by collecting this information. And I think that maybe when they're starting out, it might seem like, well, if I'm still only going to get $700 to $800, what's the point? There is a point. You need to build your brand, build your name, build your reputation for the performance, and the money will keep coming. I mean, we look at Montana. There's been rams that have sold there for $17,000 based upon EPDs and the quality to other seed stock producers, but they're averaging $1,600 a head at a year. And you can really do some good in that kind of dollar range. Now, for the commercial producer, it doesn't take you any more time. In fact, I mean, I would argue completely against that, unless you're talking about the time it takes to learn what the EBVs actually are and what they do. But no, go to a seed stock producer, look at the data they're giving you, select these bucks. There is absolutely no more time it is going to take the commercial guy to start using these today.
Thank you. I will turn it to Bindi if you're able to speak. I see you're on a phone, and you've got a lot of devices going on there, but I'll give you a chance.
Yeah, I've ended up signing into the meeting again, so you can hear me now.
Yeah.
Excellent. Completely agree with you, Jeff. It's and I sent through some, like, once you get it, there's a little bit of a startup cost. There's a cost to getting your head around it. But, genetics is one of those things that once you set it up and you set yourself, like, you put that Ferrari in gear and you press go and you set the direction, you go. So it compounds. And so your returns, come back and come back and come back to you. And you've got to get that message to those seed stock producers, because they're sitting there going, I do have to do a fair bit of work. Is it going to get recognized? Am I going to make the return? And it's the commercial guys that will drive them to be confident to say, yeah, I'm going to jump in. And one of the things that was a really big shift in Australia in terms of seed stock producers really jumping into it is when we ended up with a national online auction system so that we can view rams and buy them online across the whole. So I have a fantastic seed stock producer in my area, and she's been just reducing worm egg count. She produces some rams that are just like crazy low worm egg count. And I'd gone around and it wasn't on my list because there were other traits that didn't fit me for this ram. And we're sitting there at the auction and the online bidding just went crazy and it kept going up and up and up and up and up and up. And in the end, this one animal sold for, I think it was $40,000 Australian. And that was on the back of just an incredibly high worm egg count. And someone knew that if they put that animal into their flock and that genetic improvement in worm egg count compounded over time, they knew what it was worth to them. And they were in a really high challenge area. So when people know what traits are economically important to them, then you know how much you can spend on them too. And that's what we've seen in Australia is the prices to the seed stock producers have gone up when they're putting the genetics on the table that people want to pay for, because then people can look at it and go, well, if I can increase my fleece weight by this much, or I can decrease, like if I can shift that lever, what does that mean to my farm productivity? And you can buy with confidence. You know what you're getting. It's not just, my dad with his general vibe and that one's got a nice face, because it's hard to drive your productivity on nice faces.
So
Real quick to the group. I just want to apologize if my computer does die. I have about 5% left, and I apologize. So
I was having the same problem but we'll quickly ask you then. So do you get a higher price for your rams when you sell them than your competitors that don't do EBVs?
So are you talking to Bindi or
I'm
me?
talking to you, Jeff. Yeah, you, Jeff.
Okay, thank you. So I think that I do, but I'll be honest with you. I've actually taken a different approach where I'm actually probably getting paid about exactly the same. However, I'm selling my ram lambs at 5 months old for the same price that it's taking them a year and a half to get. And that's kind of the approach I've taken as I'm building the flock, and then I'm going to hold back some of the better stud rams. But right now, it's funny too. All my bucks have been shipping to California from South Dakota. So
Okay. There's actually a
yep.
specific one for you, Jeff. How do you establish a value of the offspring that you use as replacements versus those that you sold when you're developing your index?
How do you
value those you sold versus those you kept when you're giving her credit for what she's produced on your farm? How do you value the ones you kept?
I'm sorry, I guess I don't understand exactly. What do you mean value though?
So I think you had an index where you were looking, had a trait
the
where
dollar view.
Yeah. And so how do you value the offspring you kept? You didn't sell them, so she didn't raise income, but they were good,
sorry.
How
yes,
do you
absolutely.
value them?
No, I actually include those as if I were to have sold them. So I have like a false value of, whatever it is, $400, I think it is, for a ewe lamb, right? That I just apply to that ewe for that dollar value. And then I also have that separate piece of the index where I'm denoting that I did keep her ewe lamb back. So
Okay. Yeah, I think that was
yep.
the question. Second one just came in for you, Jeff. Is there an EBV to look for early and aseasonal breeding traits in ewes?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't think there is at this time. But I'm not a NSIP expert. I'm strictly kind of focused on Targees, but I don't actually, and Allison, you might be able to speak to this, but I don't think there is right now.
I don't believe there is. And I don't think there is in Australia either, Bindi. I think I'm saying correctly.
No,
that's a great question.
We don't have and a lot of ours, some of our breeds aren't really highly seasonal. We've got a few other management tricks that we use, such as the ram effect and so on to work against seasonality. But our breeds aren't highly seasonal in Australia. So no, I don't know that we would end up with one of those.
So why do you think Katahdins are as a breed have so much NSIP and others don't so much?
My opinion on those is that first off, in order to run Katahdins, you have to be a bit of a nerd. So these no, I'm joking. I was just with a good friend who's a Katahdin breeder, honestly, in Tennessee, and I really think that with them, fecal egg count's been a big deal. Like if you travel through the South, you see a lot of Katahdins, and they have done a tremendous job with that fecal egg count, EBV especially. And I think that the producers in this area, or in the East that are buying these sheep, they understand the value of that and are kind of demanding that. And so when they're collecting a little bit of that information, and they've got more breeders that have already collected, quite a bit of information in order to really be competitive, it encourages you to collect more data, to be quite honest. And it's kind of a evolving door, I think, of demand. There's also and I really can't explain truly why there's more of a high demand there, but I do know that my thought, and this is anecdotal at best, is that the worm load issue is so important in the East and the Southeast that they had to collect some of this data anyway. And I think that they're trained over here with cattle, and even in the US, when we look at the cattle utilized in the Southeast versus maybe the Northwest or the West, they're highly EPD based. They have a lot of forage availability in front of these animals, and they can pump a lot of performance out of them. And I'm not saying Katahdins are the highest performing sheep on the face of the earth, but they do it while being in a humid climate and eating jungle weeds. I mean, so I don't know. I'm not really probably answering your question, but that's kind of my thought, is that some of these traits have been extremely important just for these sheep to kind of survive down in that area.
Yeah, there's a comment in the comments from Jeff from the East Coast, who says he loses more sheep on the East Coast to internal parasites than anything else, which I don't think that would be true in California.
Yep.
Okay. So let me see. So Bindi did type an answer to a couple of questions that people had asked in the chat, if people want to read it. So basically alluding to the fact that, well, as we all did, the genomics journey started off a bit ugly with hair cards and chopping off tails and whatever. And now they're down to the little TSU, the tissue sampling units. It's night and day, and you just marry that up to the EID, and it makes us look very primitive, what we used to do, and it's very nice now. And so it is actually relatively easy to collect the tissue data and marry that up to your phenotypic records. And I think some of the more kind of data, speaking of nerds, I kind of think you have to be a bit of a nerd to be in this seminar in the first place. But, people that enjoy data actually have the most amazing collection systems in terms of getting it all automated, because that, once you get over that hurdle, it actually becomes almost fun if you're a data nerd. And then she was saying, Bindi was saying that, like, there's this activation energy, I guess, and once you get going, it kind of self-perpetuates and you get the rewards on that. Did you have any other questions here that anyone has? Yep.
I have a question. So I know labor costs are really high in California, and not just in California. And after visiting Australia and Bindi's operation, I recognize that labor is really high cost there too. And Jeff, you alluded to this with udder score and foot rot as being some traits that help reduce labor. But maybe, and this question is to both Jeff and Bindi, what's like a suite of traits that you would look at for maybe reducing labor as one of your input costs?
Go ahead, Bindi.
No, you've only got a little bit of battery. You go, Jeff.
Okay, thank you so much. So I would look at, udder and feet, but I also have kind of a temperament and mothering ability score. So, I've had ewes when I was running a larger flock that would drop lambs on the ground and just kind of run off and leave them, even, and these are not yearlings, these are ewes, and like we don't need to be keeping those around, right? Or rather, we don't need to be keeping replacements out of those and that behavior kind of carrying on. So mothering ability, feet, udders, honestly, parasite resistance would be one as well. I mean, if we don't have to worm these sheep and run them through the chute, that would be a huge advantage. And then if I really wanted to eliminate even more labor, probably run hair sheep so we didn't have to share them. So
Yeah, and I agree with you on all of those, Jeff. Like they're very similar themes as to what runs through us. We've got a and I think you saw I spoke about it in um the Prime Lamb Index. We have a Lambese Direct, and so that Lambese Direct, it's a combination of traits that come together to give like a compound trait around that ease of lambing, because for us, ease of lambing is just such a big driver in terms of that, keeping it down. The DAGs, which I talked about now, hopefully people know what I'm talking about when I say it. That's a massive, like, because not only do we have to deal with them, we have to remove them, get them crutched, and then we have to manage them as well. Like you get a whole pile of daggy wool, it's an issue. So those traits are really important. And I think I touched on staple strength before. And the reason why staple strength is important is it's like a measure of the robustness, because if the sheep have a huge variation in the fiber that they're producing, it means that their body, like their homeostasis is just fluctuating all the time when they're challenged. Whereas if they're a much more, a steady staple strength is a more regulated sheep in the environment that it's running. So staple strength is a really important one for us as well. That easy care, low labor. Like if you look at some of the merinos, if anyone is that much of a nerd that they want to do this, if you look at the merinos where we were as an industry, I don't know, 60 years ago, we just put all our bets on fleece weight. We want fleece weight. And when we wanted fleece weight, we got wrinkles. These sheep were wrinkly and horrible and high maintenance, and we needed, but that was when we had sheep stations with 25 jackaroos running around, and it was fine. But we don't have that anymore, and we need to be really focused around what are the traits that make the sheep really efficient and effective in our system. And that'll be different in different environments. Like there's areas of Australia where worm resistance is just absolutely number one, and that was like that ram that sold for a heap of money was around that, because that trait was king in that area, and that's why they were happy to spend the money to get it. But it's about a system. Like what's the system? What's the labor needs that I have? And then what are the sheep that are going to fit best into the system? That's how we try and use genetics to drive that labor efficiency.
Yeah, thank you. It looks like we lost Jeff too.
I think we did. And I don't know if you know the answer to the database he uses to record and index his EBVs, because there was a question around that. And we may have to just wave our hands and say, I don't know, it looked like an Excel spreadsheet to me, but it's presumably come out of something. But I can't answer that question for you, Barry. Sorry about that.
It did have an NSIP badge on it. I know, like for our data collection over here, we have a few resources and stuff that interact with our database really well, because that's self admission of data and self-loading of data is a really important step. So there may be some resources that come through that area that are able to as you said, Alison, that once you get started, like that getting started, if you can get started with the right tools at the start, it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot more integration now with, it used to take forever for Bluetooth to talk to Wi-Fi to talk to, it was just like, it was a nightmare. And so I think that's all got a lot better. Yeah.
I don't know if you saw the picture where there was a lamb in the bucket and so on. That was back when I was really working very early on that flock work that developed the database, and that was part of measuring the mothering score as well. And we used to collect all of that and write it down on handwritten, write it on pages and then transcribe it and then upload it and then and now with the use of EIDs and just the change in technology, all of this data transfer and management is just so much more accessible. And then you overlay that technology in terms of not having to run around with blood cards and wave them around till they're dry and then make sure they don't rub next to each other and get wet again. And so much hard work has been done in this area by people way smarter and more determined than me. And it's really now sort of in our lap as producers to get onto the tools and make it happen.
Yeah, one of the underappreciated aspects of genomics, I think, is that you can use that data to actually link everybody together in terms of how they're related to each other. Even if you've got a misidentified parent, you can figure out who, it's going to be this ram because it matches. And so it actually simplifies your relationship matrix too, and that helps your accuracy as well. So it's got lots of benefits.
It's actually that area of it was a bit of a surprise finding out of this whole genomic space in Australia. And don't quote me on the exact number, but it was something along the lines of we didn't know until genomics, until this parentage testing, that actually 20% of merino twins have different fathers.
Yeah.
So a lot of the assumptions that we'd made previously weren't true.
Okay, I'm not going to make any comment there because I'm well
No.
behaved. So we're getting close to the end. Is there any final questions from anyone? Thanks everyone for participating, and we will make this available on YouTube. If you've got colleagues that weren't able to make it or would like to watch it, we'll do that at the end. I don't know if you want to launch your survey, Morgan, whilst we still have a few people
Still have
on
a
here.
few people left, yeah.
I'm not sure if I should fill it out because I feel like that might bias the system a little bit. Because
Might skew the data set.
I hope I feel very confident, but that would be. But yeah,
Also curious if anyone wants to share any experiences they've had or maybe difficulties they've had in understanding using EBVs, even finding rams with EBVs. That would be interesting to know. And that's one thing we're trying to alleviate through these webinars, is trying to address some of those issues.
And there is a spot at the end with question 8 for open-ended comments or suggestions for things you'd like to hear of in the future, if you want to fill that out. It was interesting, the difference in EBV usage amongst commercial, less than 5% to 65%. And so I realize you're in Australia and haven't been in America, but what do you think has precipitated the increased uptake amongst commercial producers in Australia to get to 65% is actually pretty reasonable, because there's always 30% that are skeptical of everything and won't do it. So that you just have to take them out of the equation. And so that's almost everybody that's going to do it is doing it.
And I think it's that tipping point. You know, I said you start and it's hard work and then all of a sudden the foundation is built, and then all of a sudden you start rolling downhill and things become really easy. And I think it's a confidence thing. It's a way of thinking about it differently. So it's got enough people out there that when someone says, I don't really understand these, like I know the letters and I know there's numbers, but I don't understand how to make it mean something to me. There's someone in their sort of community of trust that they can talk to about that when it starts spreading out. And so then they've got a farmer or they've got someone else who they can go, hey, can you just explain this to me again so I really get it? And like I've seen over time, when we have our ram sales or our buck sales, they'll now have above every pen, above every animal, have printed out their ASVBs. And so if there's someone who's there who's not really sure, they can see someone who's like me, nerding out with my own spreadsheet with different color codes on it already before I get to the sale, and go, hey, what have you got there? Why have you done that? And a lot of those conversations help, I think, to move it forward. And the other thing is, the proof's in the pudding a bit as well. Those genetic gains that drive productivity and profitability, people are seeing them and saying, yeah, that's a permanent gain. Once I shift that, that's it. It's shifted. It's there. It's going to keep delivering for me. So people are seeing that long-term importance. And I think also people understand that the big challenges on the horizon are things that we can't see to measure on farm. So, methane, how do I know if that one's more methane efficient than that one? I don't. I'm going to need to use the power of genetics and genomics. Same with, eating quality, shear force. A lot of, and that's probably where the push started, because a lot of these meat traits, the only way you can measure them is by killing the animal, which is quite difficult to then breed from it. So if we can use the power of genomics and to get a really good handle on those meat characteristics and push them forward, fantastic.
Okay, well, I don't see any more questions coming in, and it's getting up to close to 5 here. So I do want to thank Morgan for organizing this. He really has spearheaded the effort to put these seminars on. And so thank you, Morgan, for being a well-organized taskmaster. And I would like to thank Bindi and obviously Jeff too, who can't hear me, but for participating in this, and hopefully it was useful. And as I mentioned, we'll put this up on YouTube. And then if there's good suggestions for what we could do next, we'll do another one. So thanks very much. And Morgan, did you want to close out?
Yeah, I just want to thank you, Allison and Bindi and Jeff, just for taking the time to do this. Really appreciate it, and I will send out the YouTube link for the video once it's posted. Probably within the week, we'll have that up, and I'll send it to everyone who registered. We didn't get as many people on as who registered, so I think there's more interest than the people who were just on this webinar. So we'll get that pushed out.
Maybe send the YouTube link to people that registered, even if they didn't. Yeah.
Yep. Certainly will. Yeah. And and Bindi, especially, thank you for taking the time. I know you're busy at the conference in Sydney and carving out a couple hours for this. Really appreciate you.
I do want to tell everybody that doesn't know that DAG also in Australian means kind of a nerdy person. So if you get called a DAG, it's not that you're getting called a piece of poo on a sheep's butt. You're being told that you're kind of a nerd.
Yeah. Important clarification. Thank you,
Alison.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.